But we've said before that somehow the laws of the intermediate days of festivals and the laws of mourning are intertwined in the tractate of Moed Katan. And the reason is not obvious. Perhaps it's because some of the restrictions on a mourner, I mean, a mourner doesn't really do any work that's not essential. So some of the restrictions on a mourner might be similar to the restrictions on Chol HaMoed, when similarly we don't do any work unless it's essential. So maybe there are parallels, maybe there are other philosophical parallels as well. There's a sort of a stopping. There's a sort of stopping of life. There's a stopping of normal activity in both situations. Anyway, we've already seen, as we've gone through the tractate, that issues of mourning keep on popping up in the tractate, as if it's in the background of the minds of the rabbis as they're teaching the tractate. And now, as we enter the fifth Mishnah of the third chapter, we enter fully into the laws of mourning. And in fact, the laws of mourning then occupy the whole of the remainder of the tractate. So from this Mishnah, the tractate is engaged not with the laws of the intermediate days of festivals, but with the laws of mourning. And just as we've said, the festivals and the period of mourning, these laws are kind of intertwined. The Mishnah actually begins by talking about the intertwining in time if a death occurs just before a festival. In other words, if a festival interrupts the period of mourning. That's how the Mishnah will begin. So in other words, it begins with the intermingling of festivals and mourning. Hakoveret meito, shlosha yamim kodem laregel, batla hamenu gzerat shiva. Someone who buries his dead 3 days before a festival, the degrees of Shiva are annulled from him, i.e., he doesn't, as soon as the festival starts, the Shiva stops. And by the way, today we don't interpret this with the 3 days. So in other words, today, even if someone buries his day on the day before a festival, the decrees of Shiva are annulled. He doesn't say Shiva. The Mishnah continues, Shmona, 8 days. But lahamenu gzerat shloshim, 8 days before a festival, the decrees of the shloshim are annulled for him. The secondary mourning period of 30 days stops. Mipnei she'amru, because it said, Shabbat ula ve'eina mafseket, Shabbat counts in the counting. When the Mishnah uses the word ula, which literally means to go up, the Mishnah means to be included in. So Shabbat ula ve'eina mafseket, Shabbat counts among the 7 days, but it doesn't interrupt. The 7 days carry on after the end of Shabbat. Regalim mafsikin ve'einan olin, while festivals interrupt, but they don't count. So in other words, the festivals interrupt, but they interrupt the Shiva, but they don't actually, we don't count them. And Rabbi Eliezer then goes on. Rabbi Eliezer is going to make a tiny change to this halacha about counting. Rabbi Eliezer says, Misha charav beit hamikdash atzeret k'Shabbat. From the time the temple was destroyed, atzeret, that is Shavuot, is like Shabbat. Now, I don't think he's saying Shavuot is like Shabbat in terms of how we observe it. But Atzeret is a really interesting festival because it's only 1 day. Or it's 2 days in diaspora, but in principle in the land of Israel, certainly in the time of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer is living in the land of Israel. He's living in Yavne. So for him, Shavuot is 1 day. So what does he mean Shavuot is like Shabbat? He means it he means it's treated like Shabbat in the sense that it counts but does not interrupt. Very interesting idea. We don't follow Rabbi Eliezer, but that's his idea. It counts, but it does not interrupt. And why does he say this? Well, before the time that the temple was destroyed, even though Shavuot was only one day, you could actually bring the sacrifices, the Chagiga, you could bring the festival sacrifices for Shavuot for the whole week. So Shavuot in some way extended out for the whole week. And actually nowadays there are some people that don't say Tachanon for the whole week after Shavuot for this reason. When the temple stood, Shavuot in principle had a sort of extension over the whole week. But of course, after the temple is destroyed, Rabbi Eliezer says, Atzeret, Shavuot is just one day. And so he says, okay, that's like Shabbat. And Rabban Gamliel, he's a contemporary of Rabbi Eliezer, says, Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim karalagim. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippurim are like the festivals. In other words, that the festivals they interrupt, but they do not count. And the sages are going to come and have the last word. V'chachamim omrim lo k'divrei zeh v'lo k'divrei zeh, not like this one, not like the other one, but rather Atzeret karaglim. Atzeret is just like the festivals, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are like Shabbat. In other words, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur count, but they don't interrupt. And this is the halacha in the Mishnah. And this is, by the way, not what we do today. So now we consider Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur just like festivals. But this was clearly not the halacha in the time of the Mishnah. What happens? So let's go back now to Chol HaMoed. What happens if there is a death on Chol HaMoed? And mourning is slightly it's slightly reduced. Interesting, by the way, that the Mishnah doesn't tell us how mourning is carried out. The Mishnah seems to assume that people know how to mourn. I mean, it's very interesting. Look at the first Mishnah in the Talmud, which is the beginning of Brachot. Me'ei matai korin shema ba'aravit. When do we read Shema? In the evening time. So the Mishnah assumes that we already know how to read Shema. The only question it's interested in is, well, okay, when is it read? Now, and maybe that's obvious because the idea of reading Shema is already there in Chumash. And here it's the same thing, but of course, mourning is not specified in Chumash. So somehow the Mishnah knows that its audience knows how to mourn. But it doesn't necessarily know about the adjustments to mourning on Chol HaMoed. So he explains, Ein korin v'lo cholsin ve'ein mavrin. They don't tear, that means tear their clothes, nor bare their shoulders. Cholsin, they used to wear their shirts kind of a bit like sort of trendy girls do now. You know, today it's very trendy to wear your shirt kind of off the shoulder. So they used to push their shirt off the shoulder. Ve'ein mavrin, and that we don't provide the special meal for the mourners. Eila kovrav shel met, only except for the relatives of the dead. And so clearly the circle of those who used to mourn in the time of the Mishnah was much wider than today. So today the mourners are the relatives of the dead, right? But in those days, there was, if you like, a wide circle and a small circle. And the wide circle would not carry out all these things, whereas the small circle would. Eila krovav shel met. Ve'ein mavrin eila mita zkufa. Ve'ein mavrin eila al mita zkufa. And the meal, the comforting meal that the mourner eats. The mourner is not supposed to provide his own food. The community provides food for him, certainly on the first day, on the day that he buries his dead. And in the time for a regular shiva, they would actually turn the couch upside down. So they'd lower its height by turning it upside down, and they'd sit on the upturned couch. And today we have chairs which are a bit lower that people will sit on. I guess we don't really sit on couches anyway in sort of modern. I guess no, we would sit on a sofa. We just sit on a sofa, but it's not a thing for a shiva visit. Anyway, the Mishnah says, so we don't lower the chair, we don't turn over the bed on Chol HaMoed. And again, I don't think this is a halacha we observe today. And then the Mishnah goes on to explain some halachot, which actually are related to mourning in general and not particularly to Chol HaMoed. Ein molechin leveita avel lo b'tavla. We don't bring to the house of mourning on a tavla is, well, you can hear the word the word table. Yeah, I think it's a Greek word, probably gone from Greek to Latin through to English. We don't bring on a tavla. This is a kind of an ornate tray. Velo iskutla. I'm not on a. This is an iskutla is a kind of a glass or maybe a silver bowl. Velo kanon. A kanon is a kind of special basket. Eile v'salim, but just in a basket. A sal is just an ordinary basket, and very, very ordinary basket. And the Gemara explains that, I mean, clearly we're going to bring food to the house of the mourner. So when we say ein molichin, they do not bring, we're talking about bringing food here. And there was a time when rich people or rich mourners would receive food in beautiful decorated baskets and trays. And of course, poor mourners or poor donors would bring food in just ordinary wicker baskets. So the Baraita explains that the rabbis made a takana, they made a ruling that everybody should bring to the house of mourning food in a plain wicker basket so that the poor should not be embarrassed. And that's halacha for the whole of the year, not just for Chol HaMoed. And I guess we could, maybe that's an interesting halacha to think about today. For ein omrim birkat avalim b'moed, we don't say the mourner's blessing during the festival. Aval omdim b'shura u'menachamin, but we stand in a row and we comfort them, and then they send away ufotrim et arabim, and then they send the public away. So we do mourn on festivals, but the mourning is slightly reduced. And we are learning from this Mishnah and from the ones that follow all of the halachot of mourning in the tractate of Moed Katan, in a surprising place in the Mishnah.